If you've been anywhere near the AI world this week, you've heard the name DeepSeek. Some people are calling this a paradigm shift. Others are calling it smoke and mirrors. Investors are very rattled, and Silicon Valley is watching extremely closely. And many people are calling this China's Sputnik moment for artificial intelligence. But here's the thing, every time this happens in the AI world, headlines tend to run well ahead of reality. Some things are hype, some things are real, and the challenge is knowing which is which. In the next 20 minutes, I promise I'm going to make you an expert on the topic of DeepSeek, exactly why the things they've done has been so impactful in the AI world. So welcome to In the Loop with Jack Horton. So for today's episode, we're going to answer 3 questions. Number 1, what has DeepSeek actually done? Why has it had such a massive impact on the market? And is the market's reaction justified, or is it people getting overexcited or panicky? Now, what you should know by now is that DeepSeek is an open source AI model that on paper is competitive with pretty much every good language model out there. And what makes it super interesting is they claimed to have trained it for just under $6 million, $5.6 million to be exact. So that's a fraction of the $500 million US spent by other big labs. And the cost to use it is about 96% cheaper than OpenAI's best models. So that's, developers making 200,000 API calls for like $50. So incredibly, incredibly efficient. So if that's true, it's not just a breakthrough, it could be a huge threat. So that's a threat to OpenAI, to Google, and to the economics of AI itself. Because it's not just a new model, it's actually changing the entire cost structure of AI from the ground up. But of course, the simple version of this story is rarely the real one. There are loads of rumors, so that DeepSeek has access to restricted Nvidia hardware, that they cut corners, they were subsidized by the Chinese government, that it's not actually as revolutionary as it looks, and of course, there's a massive geopolitical angle. So first off, let's explain what they did and how they did it, by first explaining how language models are trained and then used after training. So AI models are created by analyzing massive amounts of data. So that's books, websites, and conversations. So they can recognize patterns in language. This process requires huge computing power because the AI must actually process and store billions of words and phrases. The training phase happens on massive server farms, that's large warehouses filled with high-end computers that work together to handle that massive amount of data. Single-point computers will never be enough to handle that amount of workload. And once trained, the model doesn't need to learn anymore. It just needs to generate responses based on what it's learned. So that's where the next step comes in, which is the running of that model. So the running of the model is called inference. So this is when basically it responds to users and generates text or creates images. This is obviously different from training where the model is still being built, because inference is that real-time part of AI. It's what determines how fast, expensive, and time-consuming it is to run. And really, inference happens every single time you might ask a question, summarize an article, or generate an image. It's this latter part, the inference part, that DeepSeek has completely flipped on its head by redesigning models to make them faster and cheaper. So improvement number 1 was actually about memory efficiency. So previously, AI models essentially process text by converting words into numbers, and they use something called 32-bit floating point numbers. So these are really powerful, precise, but take up a huge amount of memory. Now, DeepSeek reduced this from a 32-bit floating point number system to an 8-bit number system. So this cut memory requirements massively, but still maintain the same level of performance. So suddenly, models are now able to run much more affordably on less powerful hardware. So again, bad news for Nvidia. Now, in retrospect, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, seems like quite a clever and obvious thing to do, but obviously nobody spotted the opportunity. They also managed to compress the information that's stored by a large language model. So currently AI models store all the passwords to maintain conversational context. So if you then change topic and then come back to another topic that's been discussed previously, it knows about it. But before DeepSeek came about, this was tracking every inch and every single word and all the details through every single conversation, which is obviously incredibly inefficient and required a lot of memory consumption. And if you think through these models that are able to reflect and think on things, there's a lot more information it's constantly trying to store. DeepSeek managed to compress all that data by 93%. So suddenly it's able to retain much longer conversations, but without having to slow down or require even more expensive hardware. So again, this economics point on the reasoning model is suddenly much more feasible. Previously, imagine if OpenAI was providing the best reasoning models out there that basically, say, had to generate 10 times more text because it reflected on things, it asked you questions. That's why things were going to be very, very expensive. But suddenly, there's now an opportunity for things to be much more affordable. So another massive innovation was actually improving the response time of the models. So most AI models have to generate text basically one word at a time, and then it has to recalculate after each word and then go again, which obviously is slowing response time down massively. Whereas DeepSeek did something, again, in retrospect, quite obvious but very clever, which is it made the model, and it optimized the model to predict multiple words in a single step. So suddenly this reasoning model that could often be quite slow, it's reflecting, then it creates steps to follow, might ask you questions back, could become very slow. But suddenly it's now much, much faster, whilst at the same time being more affordable because they innovated in memory. Finally, perhaps one of the most clever innovations they brought to the world, using a technique called mixture of experts. So this was a massive innovation, again, on the way it remembers and loads a model. So traditional models are basically one giant massive neural network, and it loads its entire knowledge base and set of information and memory all up at the same time to provide a single response. So as you can imagine, this is really inefficient. Regardless of the question asked, the model has to activate everything it knows. So that's a lot of computing power, it slows down performance, it's very expensive, it requires more and more computer chips, more and more energy. Again, very inefficient. What DeepSeek did is created something called mixture of experts, which basically divides the model into like specialized components, which people call experts. And only those components or experts activate when the question pertains to the information it might have. So instead of loading all of the model, it only activates certain parts of it. So imagine you said explain gravity. DeepSeek might actually just only activate the kind of physics expert or the physics information set of that component part of its model. This massively reduces the amount of memory it needs, makes response time faster, lowers computing costs, makes it more efficient, and again allows these models to scale even more effectively, which is fantastic. Obviously, if all this is actually true, there's been huge innovations brought to the AI world. And as you can expect, headlines are kind of crazy right now. And almost every single person has heard about the news, whether they use the likes of ChatGPT once a month, 5 times a day, or have barely used it in their life. But there's a few reasons why it's really hit the news and taken over the world. Number one is that it's come at a time of big geopolitical tensions. So DeepSeek's impact isn't just technological. It obviously has big geopolitical ramifications. It's obviously originating from China. It challenges this view that Silicon Valley is the future leader in AI. And actually, some believe this is the start of China's rise in technological leadership. Obviously, a key concern is that big innovations like DeepSeek might start to shift global power balances. And that method of cost-efficient training could allow China to export its technology via APIs at much lower prices. As to why it's all over the news and it's really got tech companies thinking is because it's actually introduced a new scaling law. We're now moving from this obsession with competition in the training arena to inference. So that, again, running of a model when you ask a single question to ChatGPT. Inference used to be really cheap and simple. It just depended on how many users were actually making a request at any given time. But a new shift has happened that's led to this type of, inference becoming more and more expensive. Because AI is now able to think through problems, which obviously comes at an increased cost. New AI models don't just chuck out an answer instantly. They use chain of thought reasoning, which basically means instead of jumping straight to an answer, a chain of thought model will break the problem into steps and process it kind of like a human would. So it would check its work many more times, it would plan an approach, it would review its plan, which obviously makes responses much more accurate, but also, of course, slower and more expensive. And the more complex the reasoning, the more expensive it's going to be in terms of compute and power. So suddenly providing much better, accurate searches and responses just got a lot cheaper for everybody involved. Before DeepSeek, OpenAI was charging $200 per month for its reasoning model. And what I think this really points to is this commoditization of that language model layer, because obviously as well, it's open source. And I think this is another reason it's been so impactful. Its design is fully published. Researchers and developers worldwide can already study it. And we're seeing it be replicated by Hugging Face, who are getting good results so far. And even Sam Altman has suggested that he thinks OpenAI are on the wrong side of history with the open source, closed source debate. So even more than that, I think application layer companies now are able to really develop a moat. So companies like ours, many other companies who are developing technology on top of language models. And Peter Yang of Roblox said that users now will obviously start caring about AI applications more than the underlying models, which really suggests that companies building, compelling, amazing AI-driven user experiences are going to ultimately win, rather than those focusing solely on those models. And the CEO of Anthropic echoed that type of sentiment, also explaining that the efficiency really is part of an ongoing trend rather than just this big breakthrough. So US labs have been reducing training costs as a factor of 4 every single year. So China's advancements really fit within this kind of larger pattern and trend over time. But equally, the big responses from technology vendors have been quite interesting to watch too. On the one side, you've got the likes of Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who framed it as almost an opportunity. He cited the Jevons paradox. So this is the idea that something, as it becomes cheaper and more efficient, skyrockets demand. So in other words, AI isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to become more embedded into everybody's daily lives than ever before. And a leaked post from Meta's team has said that basically they're in panic mode, where engineers are urgently analyzing DeepSeek's method to try and replicate them, because obviously they're one of the big leaders in open source models, and they never clocked onto this opportunity. And so with AI cost plummeting, major tech firms in the US that have spent billions on training are probably wondering if their investments are actually worthwhile. But what's even more interesting is that companies like Perplexity, Microsoft, AWS, and many, many more are already offering the DeepSeek model through their platforms, which really showcases that when there's a cost-efficient model that's really powerful, everybody's going to try and use it. Now, you might be wondering, what is OpenAI doing about this? Well, they're now going to try and raise $40 billion, which will push its valuation to about $300 billion. And they're saying they're going to spend this on major infrastructure projects, including Stargate. And at the same time, they're saying that even despite DeepSeek, they're still seeing a lot of success with its $200 per month subscription, which they say has surpassed over $300 million in annualized revenue. They're obviously really expanding into government as well, and have just launched a new model, ChatGPT 3.0, which is a reduced version of their O1 model. So it's safe to say that even though DeepSeek have brought out an incredible model to the masses, OpenAI are not going to just die quietly. So let's discuss some of mine and other people's takes on whether the stock market's reaction is justified or it seems like a bit of an overreaction. First off, the success of DeepSeek is more than a technical achievement. It obviously has big implications for the global economy. Big tech companies have pumped billions into AI infrastructure. They've built massive training clusters, and DeepSeek suggests that really a different approach is possible. Training may be cheaper. The focus will be shifting to delivering cost-effective inference. So the ability to, in a cost-effective way, have AI answer people using that chain of thought or other advanced prompting techniques. This shift is going to probably force companies to rethink many of their investments. Companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google will probably start to adjust much of their strategies. The cost savings from, say, cheaper training could lead to a broader adoption of AI services. Lower inference costs means that more businesses can integrate the very best models into their products. But all in all, as more companies adopt similar methods, the entire AI ecosystem is just going to benefit. Lower costs drive more demand. This in turn accelerates development. Cheaper AI means more services become available to more consumers. So the result's probably going to be this huge wave of innovation across many more sectors. As a result, there are obviously going to be a lot of winners. So I think Meta is going to be a big winner. Gen AI actually supports every part of their business model and makes it even more powerful. And it's obviously been doubling down on an open source strategy, which now has just got a lot more cost effective. I think tech giants like Microsoft, Amazon, Apple are obviously going to benefit. They have now lower inference costs, which means they can integrate AI into their products even more affordably. Obviously, the open source community is probably going to have a big boom. So open collaboration is now proven to deliver good results. And ultimately, consumers and developers are going to have access to more powerful AI at much lower cost. And on top of this, I think it just further shows that application layer companies, so companies building technology on top of a language model, are going to do really well. I also think energy providers are going to be essential to the AI ecosystem still. Obviously, I buy into the paradox that the idea of something becoming cheaper and more efficient drives demand. So in other words, energy use is going to continue to be essential, and we're still going to require huge data centers to provide this technology to the entire world. Now, the interesting one is companies like Nvidia. A fantastic analysis by Jeffrey and Emmanuel broke this down perfectly. The bull case for Nvidia essentially centers on this commanding position in both AI hardware and software, which allows it to capture a massive share of investment. So you can kind of think of Nvidia as this engine maker for AI. So its GPUs are like the H100s, that high-performance engine powering deep learning models, which means that leading tech companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google really depend on them to stay ahead. Now, on the flip side, as Jeffrey Emmanuel points out, the bear case would say that there's a lot of competitors popping up, and that's going to start to challenge Nvidia's dominance. For example, Cerebras has introduced brand new chips that they claim is 57 times faster than Nvidia's H100s. Now, at the same time, major players like Google or Amazon are developing their own custom silicon, which is kind of like a car manufacturer designing their own engine instead of buying off-the-shelf parts. Now, this move obviously reduces their reliance on Nvidia hardware, which potentially erodes their big market share. And now on the software front, new developer frameworks are coming out which enables developers to write code that isn't tied to a specific piece of hardware, like Nvidia's. So when you consider really what DeepSeek have managed to achieve, which is increasing efficiency by 45x, and API calls for their model for up to 95% cheaper than other providers, it's obviously going to hit the big tech companies and in turn, Nvidia. So all in all, it's going to be a really interesting period. DeepSeek have made huge waves in the industry, and I think everyone should be watching these very closely. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you next time.